Welcome, everyone, to Real Estate 360 Live. I'm your host, Ryan Sloper. For those of you not familiar with the show, my guests and I will cover every angle of real estate under the sun, from interest rates to the economy to what's happening in Washington. Anything that affects our local real estate market will be covered here. If you got credit issues, you can call me. If you want to refinance to the lowest rates in U.S. history, you can call me. You've got the questions and I've got the answers. Make sure that you join us every Monday at WNEW 1580 AM from 2 to 3 p.m. in the afternoon. And if you have any questions, the best number to reach out to us is our off-air number. It's 877-245-2030. That's 877-245-2030. We're waiting for your call, so make sure you give us a call. I'll be glad to get back to you by the end of business today. Remember, if it's real estate, it's covered here. Got a great show lined up for you guys. A lot of stuff going on, especially over in Europe. Joining me on our panel today is Louis Cammarosano, who is the general manager of HomeGain. Louis is often cited in the media as an industry expert in the Wall Street Journal, Forbes, CNN Money, Fox Business, Smart Money, MSN, and numerous others. We're going to discuss with you about what happened in the markets last week, as well as what's on deck this week that can affect you and your real estate decisions. Louis, are you there, buddy?
I'm here, Ryan. How are you?
I'm doing well, sir. How about yourself?
Just grand, thanks.
So we got a lot of stuff going on, obviously, over in Europe right now. Very interesting, the fact that there was a lot of elections, namely the ones in France and in Greece, and it looks like that this could be bringing itself to a head right now. A lot of the fears that we had is that we didn't, at least I didn't feel like that the euro was going to be able to survive a lot of what's going on. And, this doomed experiment with the politics of austerity is basically, I think, going down in flames as voters across the region in Europe, they basically veered sharply to the left in savaging all the incumbents. And elections in 6 European nations on Sunday basically promised to end any pretense of fiscal sanity in that area. It's interesting because you and I kind of talked that we didn't think anything like this was going to pan out. I mean, obviously, we have the same issues here in the United States. And really, I think it's just a matter of time before we're forced to deal with the same things that they're dealing with. Would you agree or disagree?
Well, what I would say is that austerity is always difficult, and the Austrian economists, they kind of analogize to a heroin addict where the medicine is bad, but you have to get off the drug of excessive spending and debt. And it's very painful to do it, and whenever you get an opportunity to kind of get off the treatment and continue to make yourself feel better, you do it unless you're forced to. And the voters don't want to take the pain because, frankly, in Greece and in France, it means severe cuts. And it also, it means cuts to the people who hurt the most, the middle and the lower class, because they're the ones who depend on the government spending. But it is really the only way out, because right now, if they want to step back from the austerity and continue to spend, they're just going to drive themselves further into the day of reckoning when it's all going to collapse. Because if they don't have any money now, austerity was intended to kind of scale back and to kind of reduce debt. Spending more isn't going to help. It's only going to reduce the pain right now. And I guess, as Keynes says, in the end, we're all dead, and that's how he justifies continuing to kick the can down the road.
Yeah, and it seems as though, the United States is taking the same path.
Sure, as we've talked about, there has been no spending cuts proposed, only slower rates of spending, other than Ron Paul's bold $1 trillion cut in year one, which isn't really resonating with a majority of U.S. citizens.
And it kind of boggles my mind, because it's like, if we continue to walk the path that we have for the previous 10 years and not really willing to do anything, who are we to think that anything is going to change? It's much of the same. His plan may seem bold, but bold is what's needed right now. And it might not necessarily, bring benefit to everybody. And sure, there's going to be people that are going to struggle. But as you and I have talked, it's better to go through short-term pain versus extending this out and kicking the can down the road further, because it's just going to make for a longer period of a recession/depression.
Well, that's logical. But again, when people are chose with putting off going to the dentist or taking their medicine, they'll put it off.
Yeah, absolutely.
Even if they know what the consequences are.
And
a politician, you can't run. I mean, the reason that Ron Paul isn't catching on, he's not promising people anything other than freedom and liberty. He's not promising them any benefits or increased government support. He's not promising to cut your student loan. He's not promising to forgive your mortgage. He's not promising longer unemployment benefits. Those promises get people votes.
Well, he's not promising more government intervention.
Correct. And also government intervention in terms of government spending, of which a majority of the population may be a recipient.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, I believe he just did bring a bill forward to basically end the Fed again. Not really sure where that's gonna head.
Those are hearings tomorrow, I believe.
Yeah, I believe so. It'll be interesting to see how that all plays out and actually how much media attention is given there.
Probably none, but what's interesting about the Fed is most people don't realize that the bulk of the U.S. spending doesn't come from the tax receipts. It comes from the issuance of debt that the Federal Reserve buys.
Yeah.
So ending the Fed is probably, if people thought about it, wouldn't be popular with big government types, because it would mean that our deficit spending couldn't continue to pay for the government programs that they endorse.
And as we know right now, they're buying about 60% of all debt that's issued. So that would pose a critical problem there. And it is very interesting because of what transpired over the weekend in the European region is actually translated here to lower mortgage interest rates once again. Also,
meaning trouble in the euro. Is that what you're saying?
Yes, it's trouble in the euro. So basically, it's a flight to safety in our treasuries and our mortgage-backed security market, which I don't necessarily think is the safest thing either. But that's where the money's going, which has driven interest rates back down. Now, I know this is kind of technical, and a lot of you probably don't care about this, but there's the 10-year note, which I tell everyone that's kind of a good indicator to follow that, because interest rates tend to follow suit. Mortgage interest rates, that is, follow suit with that 10-year. Now, we haven't been able to break through a critical level of resistance at 1.90%. But when all this stuff took place over the weekend, this morning it actually had dropped down. It was at 1.85. Now, the reason why that was important is because we haven't been able to break that level of resistance for some time, since dating back to September. What that means to you out there that are searching for a home loan for if you're looking to buy a home or refinance your mortgage, means that we are hitting back to the levels not seen since September of the lowest rates in United States history. Where we go from here, Lewis and I talk all the time about, we've been wrong more times than once, and we can't control what's going on in the rest of the world. My fear here, at these levels, one of two things is going to happen. Interest rates are going to go lower, which they haven't been able to be sustainable since last September at these levels, or it can get overbought once again, and interest rates will rise relatively quickly. So I think that we're at this optimal point right now where, if people are in the market and, you have that transaction, like I said, I would probably be taking the money off the table at this point, because we haven't been able to break below that 1.8% threshold in a long time. So I just think that this is a key indicator, Lewis. Like when things they tend to follow things. And I just feel like right now, interest rates are at an extremely low level. If you have the ability, if you have the capacity to be able to buy a home right now, it might make financial sense for you to do so. We have, obviously our inflation rates, everybody can check and see what the rising of prices in food and gas and everything else. It's only a matter of time before your cost of shelter goes up as well. In the D.C. metro area, which tends to be the area where we have the most amount of jobs of anywhere in the country, or close to it anyway, a lot of government contractors. We talk about this week in and week out. It's been a relatively stable market. Now, one of the markets in the Northern Virginia area, Prince William County, for instance, is only about a 2-month supply of homes, which is extremely low. And what I'm actually noticing is this is a trend amongst a lot of the other areas that are outside of D.C., is that, there's not enough supply of homes for the actual people that are out there to willing and able to buy homes. You have 5 and 6 people vying for the same property. It's getting very competitive, which is driving the cost of homes back up. Now, why this is important is because I always tell people, don't pay attention to the price tag. That's great that it's a $250,000 house, but don't get so caught up in that. What I want you to pay attention to is, what is the cost? What is the cost to you to own that home? How much is it going to cost you monthly? Because, right now, if a $250,000 house is going to cost you, I'm making these numbers up, but let's just say $1,300 at a 4% or sub 4% interest rate. But we go another year down the road and house prices didn't increase or decrease in that same $250,000 home, we now have an interest rate of 5.5%, it's going to cost you a lot more money. So I'm always telling people to try to plan out, what your future is as far as your housing expenses and your cost of shelter in advance, because there's so many unknowns, things that can change on a dime. Interest rates are obviously changing 3 to 4 times a day. So if you're able to protect yourself, lock in your long-term cost of shelter and protect yourself from future inflation, which in my estimation is inevitable. We see the cost of groceries going up every day. I can't get out of the grocery store for less than $50. It can be very frustrating. And to the average Joe out there, that might be making $40,000 or $50,000, this cost of shelter is critical. It's very important to make sure that he can secure that cost of shelter for you and your family long term. Obviously, it looks like, the estimated, according to the numbers that the government's reporting, our cost of inflation is only rising at like 2.2%, but I feel like it's more, 10, 15%, depending upon, not stripping out food and energy. So inevitably, these long-term costs are going to rise. In the D.C. metro area, I've been seeing probably about a 7 to 8% increase in rental prices year over year. I think that that's likely to continue. We have a lot of unknowns heading into this year's elections. I'm very curious to see where interest rates head. I've noticed that gas prices are dipping back down for no rhyme or reason. Don't know if that's going to be a continuing trend, but I feel like that they are going to remain low headed into the election because that's going to keep a more positive consumer sentiment. I know that the president, the last thing he wants is for gas prices to go rise above $4. That wouldn't be good for the election. Wouldn't be good for you or I out there either. Louis, what are your thoughts heading in? I mean, do you feel? I mean, obviously you and I talk all the time, but do you feel like that this is just going to be more or less much of the same heading into the elections, or do you think that they're going to try to really start talking about cutting back spending with all this stuff that's going on over in Europe?
No, I don't think it'll have any impact. I don't think there'll be any real discussion on cutting back on spending unless Ron Paul ends up in the limelight and challenging Romney and brings those issues back on the table. That's not what we're going to be talking about going into the election. I don't think the Federal Reserve will do anything right now because the only thing, if they were to do another round of QE3, it wouldn't have any impact on the economy for months, and it probably might signal some form of panic. So I don't think they're going to do that. And it would probably raise gas prices just because it would be perceived as cheapening the dollar more. So I think you're going to see more of the same, and things will be driven largely by external events as events in Europe unfold more than any U.S. policy statements or Fed action.
And it actually takes a lot of the limelight about what's going on here in the United States when we can continue to talk about what's going on over in Europe and how it seems so much more dismal. I'd like to think that we could get back to really concentrating on what's important here in this country and really try to fix the employment situation. I know you had sent me an article last week on the actual amount of people not in the labor force rose by 522,000 in April. So they went from 87,897,000 to 88,419,000, which is the highest on record in over 30 years. To a 30-year low of 64.3% of people that are actually not participating in the labor force.
Right, so that's worse than, if people are not participating in the labor force in record numbers, that's not good. And to say at the same time that unemployment went down because we're not including those not participating is kind of a farce. And we talked last week about that bill by the congressman, I think his name is Duncan Hunter. He's trying to get to a real rate of unemployment through counting those people. But I don't know where that bill is headed.
Yeah, interesting because they're saying, the the unemployment rate dropped to 8.1%. But when you look at things with these other numbers thrown in the mix and the amount of people not participating in the labor force is rising at that rate. I mean, no
longer looking for a job.
Yeah.
Their unemployment benefits have expired. That's even worse.
It's much worse.
Without unemployment benefits and not be considered unemployed, then they're basically considered you a non-person, which is probably the worst designation you can have. At least when you're unemployed, under the official statistics, you receive unemployment insurance.
Yeah, and then we discussed a couple weeks back, too, that for ages between, 18 and 24 years old, the unemployment rate is around 50+%. So
we talked about how people are trying to encourage them to take on debt to go to school.
Yeah, not a good situation. We're coming up on a break. When we come back, South Carolina is looking to approve a bill that would allow people to use precious metals as money when we come back.